Hi everyone, and welcome back to the Crave Connection In Product podcast. I'm Audrey, I'm founder of In Product, and in today's episode, we're following up on our most recent meetup on craft, culture, and shipping ambitious work. We explored what it really means to build a culture of quality and execution excellence across the whole product experience. I'm really excited to be joined by some of our speakers from the evening. We've got Spencer Wilton, Head of Product Design at Popsa. We've got Audrey Magré, Product Design Lead at Blink. Jen Williams, Senior Director of Product and Design at Frog, and Hollie Lubbock, Design Director at Wise. Plus, we bring in the in-product community perspective as a follow-up from our last product meetup. Let's get into it. Thank you all for joining us earlier this month at our last in-product meetup. On the evening, we opened the conversation around craft. So I wanted to start our discussion here because I think what we saw in the evening is it's one of those words where everyone had a slightly different perspective. So I'm curious, when you say something is well crafted in product, what does that actually mean to you and what are you noticing?
For me, it's being designed with that intent and empathy towards the user, really thoughtfully designed. But a key thing that's coming up more and more with the availability of AI tools is actually that ethical consideration for what craft means as well, making sure that we've considered that as part of what good looks like.
Sure. I think probably just to build on what Jen said, I think all of those things are absolutely key. For me, when I notice like the craft has gone to the next level is when they bring in these like smaller moments of delight. So it could be something really, really tiny that just sort of shows that someone understood this was a moment in the product where I could actually like bring something in that's either a really good feedback, very, very clear flow, or even like a tiny micro interaction that kind of showed that they understood what they were designing for, had solved the problem, but then they took it that little step further and they pushed for those pieces of like love or something that's a little bit more intangible to be in there, and you sort of notice them peppered throughout things. And that's for me when craft comes alive.
Yeah, I'd echo what you just said, Hollie, as well. I think for me, when you see that somebody has poured, to be honest, time and love into a moment when somebody interacts with an app, that's where I fall in love, really. And I think especially when they consider the kind of emotional imbalance that a user might come with when they're opening an app, I think that's where I get kind of excited about product.
For me, outside of the context of work, when I encounter something that's really well crafted, I think what I'm noticing is a level of understanding and sympathy for the material that's being used to make the thing. And so I gave the analogy on the night of a kind of carpenter and the way that they make great choices about wood and where it's sourced from and how to use the grain and how to be sympathetic towards that material in a way that shows understanding and kind of yields the material or cuts across it to make sort of deliberate effects. And I think the equivalent of that in product design is when the designer knows a lot about the underlying material, which I think for us is like type and space and color and imagery and sort of the elements of graphic design, but then also the kind of systems and surfaces that the product lives within and connects to. So in the case of digital products, living within an ecosystem of software and hardware that lives kind of upstream and downstream of the product, if the designer really understands those things, really understands the limitations of the software and hardware upstream and downstream of the thing that they're designing, I think they make much more sympathetic decisions about what the experience they're trying to create is. And so when I see a product that clearly demonstrates that, I think, oh yeah, now this is well crafted, this is good.
Yeah, I think on the night as well, Tom used the word magical, which I think is a good one to think about. I think for me, it's, are we trying to do something better than it's been done before, and that constant kind of striving to do better and pushing the boundaries. And even if it's something very simple and seemingly every day, craft comes through when you're trying to improve things.
Right. So there's a sense of, so for example, you see, and we had that a lot working with scientists, is having a low level of understanding for people not reading long paragraphs or needing progressive disclosure and getting a sense of being a little lazy and not working hard enough, I think, in terms of understanding the latent overwhelm that somebody would have when they open your product.
Are there any other key things which you think you are noticing when you're kind of looking at, well, I suppose when you're experiencing a well-crafted product?
I think something that I noticed, like if you use something that feels like the person who made it was thinking about you, like they care about you, like the thing that you notice is a sense of being cared for, that somebody has gone, oh, I could have done this in a way that was frustrating or filled your life with friction, but I've chosen not to do so. I've taken the extra effort. Like it's a sense of care and being cared over.
Yeah. And I think for me, what I really appreciate as well is a sense of opinion and personality or point of view in either the tone of voice or the graphics being used, the way that things move on the page, having this very clear perspective from the product and that sense that a human poured their intentionality and their personality through, I think is very special. And I think that's what kind of gets you eventually hooked emotionally into coming back into that product over and over again, is that feeling that it's a digital tool and it's a tool, it's a machine, but it's been built by a human who has a perspective on something and who has a point of view.
Thanks, Audrey. So to what extent can you tell that something is great during a design process, and to what extent does great experience emerge later on once you've built and you can use the product?
I'll say something that happened for us quite recently, which I thought was really cool, is my team and I, we built a dynamic color scheme, a dynamic color algorithm that responds to a customer's brand when they use our product, and that bleeds throughout the app experience. So for example, if you're opening the chat page, instead of using gray neutrals, all of those neutrals will be automatically put together based off of their initial brand color. And it was lovely getting it, like seeing it live, and when we're testing it on staging, because obviously I kind of, thought up the algorithm, we put it in the designs and, tested it out to hell. But then seeing it live, there was an element of, okay, great, that works. So I think there was still a sense of for us in, have we done our job well enough, I guess. So I don't know if I've answered your question well, but we thought it was going to be good. But seeing it live and experimenting live was better than what we thought it would be.
Yeah, I think that's kind of the skill, isn't it? It's like spotting the germ of a good experience during the design phase and then going, yeah, no, that's the thing to invest in, because I believe that when we get it into somebody's hands, that it will create this sort of alchemy, I guess.
Yeah, and I think you can have a good idea at what's going to work, and especially if you've kind of researched it well and tested it well, with you kind of have an inkling, but things might still surprise you when it goes live. But I think that the purpose of that process is to give you that confidence that it's going to work. And I also think though that you don't really know until it's live. At the end of the day, you've got a steer and you might be quite confident in it, but until it's live, you don't start kind of really learning about how to improve it.
Yeah, I think that's maybe the tool set that we're working with is digital, and you can see how someone's actually using it and improve it from there. So I think that's as much part of the design process. It doesn't stop when it's shipped. Actually, it's about making sure that you're kind of there with that, and you've spotted it early on. I think we all kind of have this feeling when you can see that someone's come up with a really smart solution or something that you think is going to work really well, and you can kind of see it throughout the testing, throughout whatever kind of de-risking you're doing. But when it goes live, there's always something that you can improve. And I think just being like part of that and wanting to keep improving it is also super important as well.
There's something so nice though about when something does go live and it feels the way you thought it was going to feel. Like it has this sort of emergent quality of like, oh no, actually the design is panned out. It still catches me off guard because it shouldn't be surprising, because you do all this de-risking, but it does still happen.
I think it's almost like celebrating it, because quite often when we I'll sort of talk with teams and there'll be things that, either we're going to do as a follow or something is there. And actually just celebrating that moment with like your cross-functional team, with the engineers, that actually it's launched is like a huge, like it just feels like this really big moment, I think. And I just love how you talk about that. It's really like resonates with me.
I think it's probably worth just calling out how important it is to have that close relationship with engineering to make sure that it does turn out as you intended as well, because I've seen examples where with client teams where that kind of relationship isn't as close as it could be, and what they get at the end isn't what they had intended. And I think that relationship's really key to make sure that what you did test is what is eventually there.
Yeah, and I think to your point, Jen, I think something that I used to hate doing, but now I think is very special when you have the time to do it properly and do several rounds, is to run your own UI QA yourself and have those rounds with engineers where they start understanding how it is that you look at their work and how they look at your work, and having this conversation of, we use a lot of screenshots, small arrows being like, look, this is how we've built this component. And I think getting the engineering team as proficient as possible in Figma in terms of reading how components are built, to me is a great it's a great moment, because you then see how they're like, oh God, I get it, and I'm going to build it in a way that's faster. And I think all of that comes through QA.
How do you communicate that into your wider team? And are there any other ways which you have experienced which have worked really well that you can communicate that bar?
I think there's a few different things that we do. I think the main one is about actually showcasing what good is, and having examples that you can walk through why this is good, why it's worked really well to solve the problems, but also why it's hitting those craft bars. So it's actually that there are practical examples, rather than it's not just a set of principles. There's like real things that you can point to, or areas that you can kind of highlight to people. We have like a design town hall where we'll get people to talk about the work, and it's a way for actually like sharing. There's lots of different types of work that happens, and a way of kind of having more of like a shared view of what's going on and what good is has worked really well for us on that side of things.
Yeah. I think something we're looking at a lot at the moment at Blink is how do we get SLT more educated into design, but also more excited by the process of it. What we've been doing a lot of lately is showing visions, what good likes, what good would feel like. But then what I think people have responded to quite well is showing them the transition and the process that it is going to take us from where we are today to where we want to get to, with small steps. I think where it's been more challenging before is when you show somebody something that feels really exciting and they're like, yes, let's absolutely do this. And then you're asking them, well, we're going to have to do an overhaul or a revamp, and it's going to take 2-3 months, and then suddenly the excitement leaves the room immediately. So I think for us, working with them hand in hand and saying, look, we'll start with this very small first step, and kind of building out this plan of action that's entirely design led, I think has been very, very, very helpful here.
Popsa, I'll say one thing. The sort of traditional answer to this question might be having a set of design principles and kind of populating them down through the business or through the team. We have that. I don't think it works very well. I don't think that they are very applicable. So I think we end up falling back to exactly the things that Hollie's talking about: detailed feedback, detailed review, celebrating the good stuff, having a Slack channel where people share things that inspire them, and then sort of having discussions. It's interesting to me always when people share things in our design inspiration Slack channel, what generates conversation and what doesn't generate conversation, because that sort of acts as a sort of ambient indicator to the rest of the team. This kind of thing, this is where our heads are at right now, and that kind of thing less so. So that I find those kinds of like little touches kind of interesting, in addition to the more the stuff that's built into your process, like design review.
Yeah, and sharing work in progress with people who usually wouldn't be involved in those work in progress, I find sometimes super exciting, because they want to give you feedback because they're interested and they're kind of flattered that you would bring them on. And also, as you said, Spencer, it's really curious to see how people who might not be as used to being inside that design and product loop and process would think about a new feature or a new UI, and where their eyes go to, what's important to them. I think is always really fun.
I think this next question is going to be quite interesting, because what I think the really great feedback from the evening was that you're all working in very different environments, which is really kind of what we were hoping to achieve. Lots of different perspectives, lots of different environments, different priorities, different stages of business. So I can imagine that this question can be different based on your companies, but also based on the actual feature or product that you're working on. So how do you know when to say like that's good enough, and when to spend time to push designers to go further?
Tricky.
In a consultancy environment, quite often your time box, quite often that is the answer, and you get very well versed in getting to a good solution in that time you've got, and you kind of scope it out to be able to do that. And I think that's actually quite helpful, because that means that you don't start straying into too much research or overthinking it. It's kind of that balance between just enough to give you the confidence to move forward, and kind of knowing that you've gone in the right direction as well, and getting that balance right.
Yeah. I would say I never start working or give anyone a brief without a deadline. I think that's often, it's the worst way of getting nothing done, I would say. But also for us, the way we're looking at this is if it's part of one of our core flows and key actions and where we want our beachheads to be, actions that we know are going to get us money and business, then I think we always will push for as much effort as possible. And I think that that's always the place where you also get the least kind of resistance from other parts of the business to work on this. So we'd always go quite big on that. And whenever it's things that are secondary or for customers that, might not be our beachhead or that we think are more admin led, then good enough is good enough.
I think being really sharp on your vision helps with that. And just to follow up on that, Audrey, because I think you're right. It's that sharpness of who you're prioritizing, what you're prioritizing and why, and then keep coming back to that to make your decisions about when it is good enough to move forward. And I think we were saying earlier as well, not seeing it as done just because you've shipped it. Like the idea that you can come back to it and improve on it from there is really important.
I have to say, I really struggle with when to say that something is good enough. I think what it comes down to for me is basically an individual cost benefit analysis each time. So you kind of go, right, well, we're kind of working in some far-flung part of the product and people, the traffic there isn't very high and it's very administrative. Okay, we can put this one down for now and focus on something that's a higher priority. Or if something is in an area where it's part of a key flow, as Audrey said, and is likely to make us a lot of money or has some conversion risk or something like that, then we'll tend to dwell on it. But honestly, it's quite painful to say that's good enough to anything. It is difficult to do that cost benefit analysis each time because you want everything to be great.
Yeah, I think that's that's the problem, is you want everything to be great and then not to be these like flows that feel like they've been forgotten, feel like they're like substandard, because I think that's the flip side for me of when I feel like something isn't crafted. Those need to be at least good enough, and what good enough there is that it works really well. So it's almost like different areas have different levels of effort put towards them, but it always needs to be good enough, because I think you can kind of spot those pieces when they're not there. It's always that trade-off, like Spencer said. It's like, what is it for this area that meets that bar? I think also with design, it's really good to actually show what it could be. So even if we can't do it this time, to have actually done the work to show that, okay, well, this is what we can launch right now that's smaller, but actually what's coming next and why is that an important thing for us to align around? Because I quite often feel if you don't have the what's next and what comes after that, and that vision that Audrey was talking about, it's very hard to get the buy-in to move it forward, because you've launched and maybe it's doing quite well, but you kind of want everyone on board that actually, no, we can do these 3 steps more, and that will get us to that really high crafted place. And now we're at like a good enough level, but we want more.
If you're going to launch as good enough, how do you then come back to it?
I think it varies. But I would say if you've got the buy-in earlier on about what the things that you're going to do next are, that's much easier, because as soon as it's launched, you learn something new. So you end up having to dual stream anyway. You're going to be improving the thing that you've launched based on the information you're getting back out, it being in the real world, but you also might have some other pieces. And I've found it's more helpful if people are excited about the next things coming, because then they want to do that dual stream. And it's very hard it's hard to do, to work on both at the same time. So I think earlier buy-in, excitement.
Yeah.
Out of curiosity, like who are the people in that sentence that you're getting excited of? Who is it that you need to generate excitement with?
So this is something that's really interesting about Wise, is that the team, because at the point of growth that we're at, there's a lot of autonomy. As long as you're moving towards the same kind of overall vision and goal, there is a lot of buy-in for the teams to have ownership of like their areas quite heavily. So although we're all moving towards the same direction and there's a view of what is good enough, within that space, people have room to actually achieve that in the way that they want to. So it's almost like you want the engineers to be brought in particular, because you want them moving forwards. You want the product managers to feel that this is something that's going to be beneficial. And you also want leadership to have the view that actually we do want to keep going further. So I'd say it's like multiple levels of people that need to be like kind of part of it. It's they're all your teams in different shapes, and you want all of them to want it with you.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think because Popsa is kind of a smaller setting, you go leadership first, and then it's just like, then the decision is made. You know, if you're going to spend more time on it, it's just convincing leadership that this is a thing worth spending time on. And then it's like, now it's in a roadmap. You've committed at that point.
Yeah, I think like major overhauls and big pieces of work, yes. But there's like, again, knowing which of those bigger pieces that are like longer term roadmap versus like the day-to-day smaller pieces or smaller opportunities. And it's different people, different things, but it's like, it's all your team really.
Yeah. And I think on that, Hollie, like, yeah, I'd agree that showing a sense of what might come next whenever there's, let's say MVP design feature that we've agreed on we were going to ship as is. Something that I do like doing as much as possible is also sharing notes of anticipations and potential for, what might become problematic in the future, where we might receive some either, customer complaints if it's really something that's great, but a sense of having looked forward a little bit and obviously like giving the data team a real strong strategy of what to track and where we think there might be an issue. I think early on, is always a good way of getting people to be thinking about how this is going to have to keep iterating and having a little sense of being prepped.
Yeah.
It's really interesting, that point, Audrey, because that point specifically came up in a previous meetup, which I ran just before Christmas, which is a completely different topic around like building a data culture. And I suppose from like a product management perspective, knowing kind of what the kind of possible routes could be after, what are you testing for? And then like, what could the solutions, I suppose what could happen based on that as well. So making sure that everyone is aware of what could happen as well. So you know what to look out for, and that, things don't come as a surprise and kind of knock you off your track. So it's really interesting how that's, kind of playing out in quite a few conversations across different cross-functional teams as well. What conditions within a company do you think makes it like really possible to do kind of high quality work?
I guess I can kind of kick that one off, because I've got a sort of unfair advantage because we've got a designer in the exec, and that really does open some doors for you, and it does get you buy-in much more easily. When I talk to peers who do the same job as me in other organizations, they spend a lot of time kind of lobbying for energy or money to be spent in their department, and I don't really have to do that. So it does make it much more possible to do good quality work, because that's a bit of a get out. I'll add another one, which is I wouldn't underestimate the power of just like being physically close to your collaborators. Short feedback loops between you and engineers, short feedback loops between you and product, short feedback loops between you and the exec. It's like a sort of cheat code to communicating values and communicating subtle things in interesting ways. A small example, which is our old engineering manager used to just keep his desk immaculate. I mean, the most beautiful desk that you've ever seen. And everybody kind of saw that. And what it did was it sort of established a kind of signal for everybody else in the team about what this person values. And so when you're working with Tom, that he's going to be in the detail, and he's going to be doing things to an immaculate degree of quality. And that is something that he was able to communicate without saying it, just with his sort of physical behavior, and being physically proximate to him got the message across really, really effectively.
I think I've found over the years as well, obviously having great people is really helps. But when you see your team going through lots of changes and acquisitions and kind of large scale change, actually holding true to a couple of values that are really key helps. And I think for me, there's 3 key ones, like that curiosity and hiring people that are really interested in learning and understanding more, but just being curious about what's going on, and then being brave and bold and keen to kind of try something new. But I think the biggest one for me is being humble and not letting your ego kind of take over. And I think those 3 things help people collaborate and really get to good quality work, because there's a knock-on effect to all those things that drive behaviours through the business.
Yeah, hard agree, Jen. I think something we're seeing here, and I think we're all pushing for more than anything, because I've seen other companies where that wasn't what was being rewarded, is rewarding somebody's agency and resourcefulness. over efficiency, I think, is a great way of showing that there is a level of emotional safety, that you can mess up, that you can not always be right, but that you should be rewarded for trying and for, getting that little bit further away from your comfort zone. I think getting people experimenting rather than trying to achieve and accomplish is a great way of showing up emotional safety. And I think similarly to what you're saying, Spencer, for me, a lot of the best work that I've seen and that I've done was in the smallest teams, because the emotional investment was really high, both between the people and the product individually, but also between people themselves. You want to help each other out. You want to riff with each other because you know each other. You know what makes them tick. And I think there's almost a greater sense of play and of challenge because you feel safe with each other. So I think for me, also being physically present, I think helps cultivating friendships, personal conversations as much as possible, even if sometimes it feels a little daft starting a meeting with, a bunch of 5 minutes of dumb questions or small talk. I think that's absolutely essential, because if people don't know each other, it's hard for them to work with each other fluidly, I would say.
Do you, on the flip side, do you think that there are any particular conditions which kill quality, which are kind of common traps that teams or businesses can fall into?
I think the push for the smallest thing possible always, and there not being a balance, because sometimes that is the right thing to do, but there being a view that actually sometimes we do need to make bigger leaps to get much further, and there being comfort in that, and it being a conversation that's very easy to have with people, of which is the small one and that's okay, and which needs a bigger one, and that we don't always just default to the small.
That's a really good one. One for me that I always watch out for is when people start citing that users won't notice something and therefore it's okay to do. Like the excuse that something made no difference when we showed it to users, or that nobody brought it up in a testing session. It feels very pragmatic and it feels very persuasive when people say that. It's like, oh, we don't need to spend time on this because nobody noticed it. But I've never been of the view that just because somebody can't articulate it means that it doesn't matter. So once the view starts setting in, oh, it's okay, users won't notice it, that I feel is such a killer.
One thing I've seen in some teams is where you've got misaligned KPIs. So you have one team prioritizing, say, velocity versus kind of meeting user needs, and those things clashing down the line. So making sure the teams are aligned on what they're trying to achieve is important.
Yeah, agreed. I'd also say having a sense of waterfall in everything, right? So having engineers not in early. I think the worst results I've ever seen in terms of shipping designs well, is having engineers brought in after everything had been done. I think also, and I know we touched on this a little bit last time, I think sharing designs for scrutiny rather than sharing process. And I think that should go both ways, both from, higher up designers and younger designers, sorry. But I think that there's a high level of scrutiny in design right now. And I think most of the time, designers will be the smallest group in every room. Spencer, it might actually be different. I know you guys are so design-led, but for us, we always have a ratio of 10-1, pretty much. 10-1 engineers to a designer.
That just seems like a lot to me.
And I think it's fostering a culture of appreciating the design process and sharing moments where you might have wasted time but experimented with something and found something out as a result, but also kind of bringing engineers and product managers along with you in the journey. So I think especially for younger designers is getting them into that state of mind that they shouldn't feel scrutinized and they shouldn't feel like they only have to share work when it's finished, but that they should feel safe and they should see us and people around them sharing their failings and designs when they're, at the very beginning, when you don't feel super confident about something or, whatever, and sharing maybe even we do a lot of body doubling, sharing how you're building things. I think anything that kind of gets people away from that sense of this is my exam coming up every day and be like, now I'm going to be quizzed on something, and getting them in that feel of it's okay to not feel confident about something, and it's okay to not have the answer to everything. I think is long-winded answer, but give them the space to not know.
I think that really segues into our kind of next question as well. What advice can you give to the audience if they're working in an environment where design craft isn't valued cross-functionally? Is there any other advice that you could give to people in terms of making that step and what they can personally do?
Yes, I would say share what you're passionate about that isn't your design, but that would be companies that people would aspire to be like. So, for example, at Blink, I think we're trying to transition from a company that historically has been kind of sales-led, business-led, engineering-led into something that feels a lot more intentional in terms of both product and design. So eventually, my grand plan would be they'd be design-led eventually, but, And I think showing them the greater principles of companies that they would want to rise to and get, compared with, I think is a great way of showing that the quality of the design and the product has to be taken into consideration. It has to be given time to and resources to. And I think that's where you kind of start seeing people reacting like, oh, okay, I get it. I think up until you kind of put it in a, business setting, it's hard, I think, for people to understand quite the value of it if they haven't come from a design crafts place.
And on, I suppose, your career journeys personally, are there any walls that you've hit as design leaders when you've been trying to raise the bar, which you've learned from?
I think we've probably all hit something where you couldn't ship the thing that you really wanted to, or you had to cut it back. I think the way that I have tried to move through it is to make sure that you're speaking in the language of the people that you need on board with you. So you're shifting your storytelling, you're making sure that it's really clear, and you're kind of helping them achieve their goals as well as achieving your goals. And you find like a small win. And then when you get that win together, it becomes much easier to keep getting those wins. And it's, I think, identifying something small that I could do that on was really, really helpful, because it came very practical, and it wasn't like an intangible thing that I'm talking about. It's something like, remember when we did this? Well, we could do that again, and we can keep having those wins together.
Yeah, that's quite a good one. I mean, I guess the most common wall that I think maybe I come up against is sort of misalignment between what I'm trying to accomplish and what some other part of the business is trying to accomplish, and like us getting in one another's way. For me, most often it's somebody who works in like our marketing team, or somebody who's responsible for the brand not agreeing with the sort of design direction of something. And if I've hit that wall, it typically means that I've either not got them on board early enough, or not communicated what our intentions are early enough, or I'm not acting as a collaborator in the way that would bring them onto my team and make them into an ally for what I'm trying to accomplish. So yeah, I suppose if I was going to give some advice to somebody who's hit one of those walls, it's to make those people, find some way to convert those people into your collaborators.
Spencer. So to close this off, we put a question out to the In Product community who attended the meetup. So the question was, if you were trying to evaluate whether a company's quality standards match your own, what do you look for? What are your red flags and your green flags? So I'm going to share a couple of the highlights with you. So the most common theme among green flags was shared ownership. So I think we've touched on this quite a lot already, where there's protected space for refinement and engineering teams who really care about the implementation detail. One specifically came back, which I think particularly resonated with Jen's theme and focus in the evening, was the ethical thinking is present and the long-term interests of users are considered. So I'd love to hear from each of you, like, are there any what are your thoughts on those two? And are there any green flags which, you specifically look out for?
Yes. I always like to ask how they deal with failures and postmortems and problems. And I think that's such an interesting way to see what kind of people you're talking to on the other end, how the company has kind of, understood something that might have gone wrong and how they bounce back from it. And I think that really shows a level of willingness and openness to, conversations, and also admitting that, things will always be bound to go wrong. So I would say, whilst interviewing, that's always a question that I like asking.
Thanks, Audrey. Any other green flags among you?
I think that being laser focused on the user and the end customer and what they need, and being driven by insights from users, I think is a green flag for me, looking out for that.
Mm-hmm.
I was just going to say, I think it's interesting to see where design sits in the org chart.
Yeah.
The relationship between design and the exec is always an interesting one to see, because in some companies it's 3 or 4 layers down, and some it's much higher up. And I think that tells you a lot about what the company's values are.
Yeah. Just to add on to that one, I think also, what are their growth plans? Like, which areas are they investing in? If they have if they have a small design team now, but there's a clear investment and wish to grow, that signals that it's something they're aware of and that they're trying to improve. So even if it's not there right now, is there the buy-in clearly for that to actually be something of where they want to build their teams?
I think that's a good one. Knowing what their plan and their view of design is for the next 12 months is always great.
And then on red flags, again, a couple from our audience. One of them was a constant focus on speed. So we'll tidy that up later, becomes permanent, and it's like the go-to approach. And then the other point, which commonly came through, was a lack of psychological safety. Now, that was from quite a lot of different people, a lot of different comments within that. But I think the most highlighted comment and the main cause coming from leadership shutting down debates. So can you share your advice to the audience who may be like tackling those red flags in their roles? With those two kind of elements in mind, would you kind of have any key takeaways for them?
It's hard because sometimes it depends on the personality of, who is in the leadership team, and whether they're even willing to understand where the person is coming from or the value of, of design. But I would say sometimes what I've witnessed is a very strong bias for what they personally experience. So you will speak to, a leader, and they'll be like, "Oh, but I hate this. I hate that." And I think something that we've done consistently, which I think has always been very, very beneficial, is sharing user feedback reports regularly with the entire company in order to give them a sense and an education of who they are within their user base. And I think that often is very well received. And I think that kind of goes to your point, Jen. If a company isn't user-centric, how do you bring it to that point that at the very least they have an awareness that what they're experiencing when utilizing your product is irrelevant and it shouldn't be taken into account if they're not your target user?
I just have a thought on, there's 2 thoughts that I have on this one. One is, I've never been able to identify psychological safety externally. I've never been able to look at a team as a candidate or something like that and go, that's a team that has psychological safety, and that's a team that doesn't. I think it's something you sort of, because you are a component of it when you join the team, and whether the team trusts you as much to do with the overall team culture in terms of creating that sense of safety. So I'm not sure how you would even use it as a red flag, to be honest, because once you enter the team, it's kind of like, that's when you discover whether the team is safe to communicate with one another. So, and then the other point that I had around management shutting down conversations, or leadership shutting down conversations, I just want to be a bit of a contrarian on this one, because I do think sometimes internal debate can become distracting to the goals that you're trying to accomplish as a company. And we do, we have a phrase that we use internally quite a lot, which is sometimes you do just have to disagree and commit. And it is the executive's right, I think, inside of a business to tell the team, okay, we don't see eye to eye on this, but I'm sorry, we're proceeding in this way, and we're not going to spend any more time debating this, because it is costly to do so. As much as on the surface, I think I probably agree with the comment, I think I would add some nuance from my own experience to both of those points.
We're ending on typical Spencer style.
Sorry.
Thank you all so much for listening, and honestly, a huge thank you to all of you for giving up your time for the conversation, both on the evening itself and following up. Yeah, I really appreciate the perspective that we brought from all of you. I think that it's so nice to see people from very different environments having, I suppose, similar challenges in certain ways and very different in others. And yeah, huge thank you to our In Product community members for coming along to the meetups, giving their thoughts as well. So thank you all for being part of the conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.